Hey, what's going on, guys? Rob Gaming here. We're back with another video. Today's episode, we have a new guide for Restoration Druid. Right now, this is for patch 11.15, but I don't think there's going to be too many major changes coming in 11.17. Could be wrong on that, so I think that this will be up to date through 11.17 as well. But for the purposes of this video, just know that this is this is geared towards 11.15 specifically. Again, if there's no major changes, this will continue to 11.17. So let's go ahead and get started. If you guys want to follow along with me, I'm going to leave a link in the description of the video. Just press the link. It'll take you right out to the website, and you can kind of go through here and just kind of follow along with us. So yeah, scrolling down here, let's take a look at the pros and cons of Restoration Druid. Why would you want to play it? So Restoration Druid, we've got a pretty decent damage profile. Just kind of thinking back historically about Restoration Druid, they have a pretty good single target damage profile, and a lot of that comes through their cat weaving. So they can rake, they can rip, they have their ferocious bite, they have a lot of things. They have their moonfire that they can put on the target to tick a lot of damage. So just historically speaking, they're typically one of the higher single target DPS AoE healers. Another thing about playing Restoration Druid is the people who play Restoration Druid seem to love it. And a lot of that is because there's no other healing specializations like it, especially due to them cat weaving. You're kind of shifting out of multiple forms. You're kind of applying bleed, you're applying hots, you're applying damage over time effects, and it's very engaging to do that. Now, with that being said, that does kind of lead us into a con over here. It's highly GCD dependent. You're going to have a lot of things that you have to track. You're going to have dot management. You're going to have hot management. You're going to have procs that you have to react to. So these two kind of go hand in hand. It can be difficult to play, and it's very high APM. Now, going back over to the pros here, we do have a really good party buff, Mark of the Wild. This is going to grant that versatility to your group. And while this isn't the strongest party buff, it's not as strong as something like an Arcane Intellect, a lot of the times you will get invited to a group just for this. So Druid, just in general, this is not necessarily unique to Restoration Druid, but they just have a ton of utility. So we've got a party buff, we have a Battle Res, we have a Ursul's Vortex, and a lot of the times you can drop an Ursul's Vortex, you can Typhoon, and it will do an AoE knock, and then that vortex will suck everything back in, and it won't like ungroup the mobs or anything. And it can also work like a grip as well. If you can think of the last boss of Theater of Pain, right? All those little, what do you call them? Little hands or whatever that spawn. You can drop an Ursul's Vortex, and it can group all them in, and you guys can just quickly cleave them down. We've got our Incap Roar, which is just going to be another AoE kick. You kind of have two between this and Typhoon if you talent into it. And then we also have Stampeding Roar, which is going to kind of help speed up your group, just going from pack to pack. So that can be a decent time saver there as well. And then just going into our very last con over here is they do kind of have a high skill ceiling. And a lot of that is due to there's just so many different things that you can do with Druid. You have all these forms that you can shapeshift into, but a lot of that can be difficult to do because each time you shapeshift into a new form, it's like you're playing a different class almost. It's like completely different abilities, right? Your bear form is going to have completely different abilities than your cat form. Your cat form's going to have different abilities from your main form. So a lot of the times it can be kind of difficult to set all that up on your action bars and just kind of getting everything to synergize well. And then just the specific example that I used here, a lot of the times playing Restoration Druid, you can shift into your bear form before a big damage event goes out, and you can soak a lot of that damage with the increased stamina that you get. Okay, let's go ahead and quickly go into talents down here. So going into our talent calculator, you can see that we are running Wildstalker at the moment over Keeper of the Grove. You can run either. They're both pretty similar, to be honest. But Wildstalker probably does have that more traditional feel to Restoration Druid rather than going something like Keeper of the Grove. You see down here in the bottom right, we are running Undergrowth, so we are running that sort of double Lifebloom build. We are also running Convoke the Spirits along with our Cenarius Guidance, so that's going to turn Convoke into a 1-minute cooldown, which is really, really nice. It's so fun to play around Convoke because it's just a satisfying button to press. Health bars are going to go up, and it's just nice, to be honest, to have a 1-minute cooldown in your back pocket that you can utilize, if things do get hairy. This is one of the reasons I love to play Mistweaver Monk, because they have their Red Crane on a 1-minute cooldown. So something to keep in mind there. We also have our Grove Guardians, and we've also seen a lot of buffs to our Tranquility as well. So we're running Tranquility right now. Again, along with our Grove Guardians, they're on a 20-second recharge time. You don't want to just send all your Grove Guardians unless you need like major burst healing. And you can see over here in the middle, right, we're running Wildstalker. So basically with Wildstalker, things do change a little bit. You're focused a little bit more on cat form than you would be in Keeper of the Grove. And a lot of that is going to be due to how Rip and Rake work. So they have a chance essentially to do additional damage to your target. So you want to make sure that you're keeping Rip and Rake up at all times. And then your Wild Growth, Regrowth, and Efflorescence also have a chance to proc something called Symbiotic Blooms, which is just going to essentially do additional healing for you. And we talked about single target damage a lot earlier, and a lot of that's going to come from Vigorous Creepers here. So those Bloodseeker Vines are going to increase the damage your abilities do to those effective enemies by 5%. So that Rake and that Rip that you put on a main target, you're going to do more damage to them through Vigorous Creepers. And then your Symbiotic Blooms is going to increase any sort of healing that you're doing to that target that's affected by it. Nothing really that you need to be worried in here in the middle. Most of this is just kind of like pat the stats to beef up your damage and your healing. So yeah, not going to dive too much more into talents, to be honest. We'll cover a lot of that in the rest of the guide. Let's go ahead and jump into this sort of how to play Restoration Druid section, and we kind of talk about some of the main stuff. So the way you play Resto Druid is you're kind of like this ramping hot spec. The more hots that you have on a specific target through our mastery, the more healing that you're going to do, essentially. So what you could do is single out a single person, maybe like a tank who has, you know, like a big bleed effect or a big dot on them. You can put a whole bunch of hots on there, and each hot you put on there is going to sort of buff the other hots. Now, not only that, you can also ramp some of your big cooldowns. So like a Tranquility ramp, for example. You could put a whole bunch of hots across your party like a Wild Growth. You could put Life Blooms out, Rejuvenations, and then you could funnel all that additional bonus healing that you're getting from those into a big Tranquility. So you're sort of this ramp spec, and it's very important that you understand how that works, because that's where a lot of your burst healing is going to come from. Now, Restoration Druid does have a proactive healing style, like we just talked about. You can ramp some of your really big spenders. So you want to make sure that you're keeping your hots up. Your main two are going to be like Life Bloom and Efflorescence, and then when you really need a lot of healing, this is expensive to do, but you can also prep with Rejuvenations as well. I typically recommend, if you are spamming out a whole bunch of Rejuvenations, go ahead and put your Innervate before it, and you can basically negate all the mana costs from those expensive Rejuvenations. One of the downsides of playing Restoration Druid is you don't have a ton of strong cooldowns. I mean, you do have strong cooldowns, but you don't have a lot of them. So, for example, Flourish is on this list. We're not even running Flourish at the moment. We have Incarnation Tree of Life. We're not running that. One thing that I did miss that I should probably add before I end this video is Convoke the Spirits. We do have that. And then we also have our Tranquility. So we really have like 2 cooldowns. It's been one of my major complaints about Restoration Druid since the start of the War Within, is we don't have a ton of cooldowns to play around. Thankfully, though, like we said earlier, our Convoke the Spirits is on a 1-minute cooldown, so that is pretty nice. But I do think that has been a problem for Restoration Druid since the start of the expansion. We also have mana management. So we kind of talked about Innervate and Rejuvenation, how you kind of want to pair those two up. We also have Master Shapeshifter if you are running that. I had the tooltip wrong here. I just updated it really quick. But basically, your Wrath, Starfire, and Star Surge will regenerate mana. So if you are struggling with mana, I recommend to go into Master Shapeshifter and start using some of those spells. This probably synergizes more with Keeper of the Grove rather than Wildstalker, because you're in cat form so much in Wildstalker. But, you know, something to keep in mind, if you are struggling with mana, you can take this talent. And that does go hand in hand with our Wrath comment here, just depending on which spec that you're playing. And then we talked about Innervate, Rejuvenation. And then we have our ramping section, which we kind of already talked about, how you can put Efflorescence down, a whole bunch of hots out, and then press your big healing buttons. You can get more value out of them through our mastery. And you also have like a mini ramp phase as well. So we have this build-up phase, which we call the ramp, and we have this called the payoff phase, which is essentially you pressing your big spender, right? But if you think about Wild Growth, if you save your Wild Growth and you don't send it right at the start of the pack, what you can do is you can build up a few hots before you send your Wild Growth into your Swiftmen, which will proc our Soul of the Forest, and then you can Wild Growth and get more value out of it. So anything that has any sort of cooldown in your kit, just think about that build-up phase and that payoff phase. You know, how can I get the most value out of this cooldown? What spells can I press beforehand to get more value out of my healing spells? Another example of this is Regrowth. So basically what we're doing is we're putting out a whole bunch of Rejuvenations before we Regrowth, and it's not only reducing the cost of Regrowth, but making it stronger. And again, that's due to this Abundance talent here. And then not only that, it's going to cast faster due to this talent called Wild Roots. So that is one thing that has kind of changed about Restoration Druid from the past. In the past, we weren't pressing Rejuvenation that much, but you want to be pressing Rejuvenation as long as your mana allows for it. Now, you don't want to just be sending rejuvenations just kind of randomly. You want to be sending them before the damage happens and kind of ramp that again into your payoff phases here. But just know that rejuvenation is back in the mix now. So we talked about Tranquility already. You know, you can get rejuvenations out, Wild Growth out, a couple other hot effects, Double Life Bloom, your Efflorescence, which will also proc Spring Blossom, which is another hot effect, to really amp up that Tranquility. Just remember, it is a channeled cast, so if a swirly does come down, you are going to have to move, unfortunately, and that is going to minimize the amount of healing that you get from it. So yeah, just kind of going over that before we go into the priority. That's kind of what you're looking to do with Restoration Druid, right? That's kind of the ramp phase, right? From a healing perspective. So now let's talk about our rotation priority. So we said earlier that we are running Undergrowth here, so that's going to allow us to keep 2 Life Blooms up. I recommend Life Blooming yourself and another DPS. For the most part, tanks are decently self-sufficient, so I like to put this on the squishiest other DPS, whoever that might be, typically something like a mage or a hunter. Make sure that we're keeping our Efflorescence on the ground, and then from there, we're just kind of sending hots as needed, right? We're sending those rejuvenations, we're putting a regrowth hot on somebody as needed when their health goes down. It's not something that you're just sending and just kind of burning through your mana. So just kind of be mindful of that. For the most part, right, if you have somebody who's at 75% health, 1 or 2 hots is going to top them off, right? As long as they're not taking that consistent rot damage. And then we also have our Grove Guardians, which we did talk a little bit about earlier. What you're going to be doing is sending 1 charge for rot damage, and then if you need a lot of burst healing, then just use more charges as necessary. Typically like to always have at least 1 next to me healing. You know, something you don't really want to overcap on a whole bunch. That had a bit of a typo here on line 5, so I just changed that. But what we want to be doing is casting Regrowth with our Omen of Clarity procs, right? That's going to make our next Regrowth free. And then we also want to be consuming our Swiftman with Regrowth. And Swiftman is very important because this is on a 15-second cooldown, and we have a lot of things in our tree that tie to Swiftman. So let's go back to our tree really quick here, and let's just type in Swiftman to our talents. And we can see all the different things that light up that Swiftman is connected to. So one of the main things is going to be Soul of the Forest here. So this will increase the healing of your next Regrowth or Rejuve by 150%, or your next Regrowth by 50%. Excuse me, or our next Wild Growth by 50%. So we did talk about that earlier, how you can Swiftman into a Wild Growth, but you can also Swiftman into a Regrowth as well, just depending if you need more single target healing or not. Now, Swiftman is very important to cast because it's tied to so many things in our tree. So what you want to be doing with Swiftman is you want to make sure that you're trying to get that off as many times in a pool as you possibly can. Now, if you are running Verdant Infusion here, Swiftman is not going to consume any of those heal over time effects, and instead it's actually going to extend the duration of your heal over time effects on the target by 8 seconds. Now, another spell I want to talk about that kind of goes hand in hand with Swiftman, not really, but kind of, is Nature Swiftness here. On a 1-minute cooldown, it has 2 charges. We did see some changes early in the expansion to this. And what you can do is, before you convoke, is you can Nature Swiftness. And if you look at the bottom of the tooltip here, this is going to increase the healing of your next Regrowth by 200%. So, again, correct me if I'm wrong here, pro Restoration Druids, but what you used to be able to do is Nature Swiftness before you cast a Convoke, and all the regrowths within that Convoke will be buffed by your Nature Swiftness. So we talked about earlier how there's like a lot of different tricks that Druids can do. This is one of them, and this is really going to increase the effectiveness of your Convoke the Spirits. And then at the end of that Convoke the Spirits, it actually does not consume your Nature Swiftness, so you still have that instant cast regrowth that you can use on somebody. So long story short, with this step here, this priority is you're kind of sniping health pools with that Swiftman, with that Nature Swiftness. And then once we get into the rest of this is pretty much going to be cat waving. And what you want to be doing, as long as people are healed up, you're going to be cat waving for the most part. So you're going to get your dots up on the target. You have a Sunfire, you have your Moonfire, you have your Rake, you have your Rip, you have your Shred, and you also have your Ferocious Bite. So you're kind of doing this in a window. You go into the pack, you apply your Sunfire, your Moonfire, that's great. You'll get your hots out, you'll go into cat form, and what you want to do is you want to apply those bleeds. So Rake is 1, Rip is 1, Shred is 1. And what you're doing is you're building up combo points and you're spending them, but you're also going through your energy as well. So once you deplete your energy, that's kind of your window to get out of cat form, do some healing, let that energy pool regenerate to 100, then you go back into cat form and you kind of restart this cycle here. So you can actually instantly shift into cat form. We have fluid form here. This is a talent that you can take, and you can just instantly go into a rake or a shred, and that's going to shift you in. You know, depending if it's AoE or single target, you're going to thrash and swipe in AoE. You're going to rake and rip in single target, and then you're going to be spending those combo points on your ferocious bite, which uses both energy and combo points. So be aware of that. So it's really not that complicated. To be honest, I used to have a macro, like a single target AoE macro. I just put all the stuff in a cast sequence until I ran out of energy, shift out, go back and heal. You could probably do something similar like that for you, but just something to keep in mind. It's a very straightforward damage rotation, which you do go into cat form. There's not too much that changes outside of needing reactive healing. Okay, going into consumables, again, you can just go into the guide and read some of the stuff. I'm not going to go over, I'm not going to read out every single enchant or anything like that. Go into the guide, you can see it for yourself. We have our embellishments, we have our tier set here as well. I will talk about this really quick because we've not talked about this yet, I don't believe. So like all the other specs right now, we do have this insurance that we're playing around, and insurance is going to apply a hot to people. And if they do drop below that certain threshold, they're instantly healed and the hot is consumed. So one thing that's really nice though is when you get that 4 set, that hot that is consumed will be replaced with one of your own hots. And it's going to work kind of off it does work off a priority-based system. Rejuve over germination, over regrowth, over wild growth, just depending on what is missing. And then our life bloom here has that 30% chance when it does bloom to add insurance to the target. So let's talk about life bloom a little bit. We haven't quite talked about that yet, why life bloom is important in our rotation. I probably should have talked about that earlier. But with life bloom, you have a certain window that you can refresh it, and basically life bloom will auto bloom for you. So if you read the tooltip, it says when life bloom expires. Well, you actually have, and maybe somebody can help us out in the comments, I believe it's like a 4-second window that you can recast life bloom, and it will just automatically bloom for you on the recast, and you don't have to just let it completely fall off and expire. So when that bloom effect does happen, we will get insurance applied to the target. Now, life bloom also does a lot of healing for us due to a talent here called verdancy. So when life bloom blooms, up to 3 targets within your efflorescence are healed for X amount of spell power. So that's very important. It's very important that people are standing in your efflorescence and you have that bloom sort of gameplay loop going. That's where a lot of your healing is going to come from. I did forget to mention that earlier. And then we have our general tips section. You know, we pretty much already talked about all this for the most part, but it is there if you do want to check some of that stuff out. Let's finally talk about our stat priority. So intellect is going to be the main stat priority for you. We have haste directly below that. We're a hot base spec. More haste means more ticks, which means more healing. Now, one of the reasons that haste is so strong on Restoration Druids is this part here. The Druids receive a 6% multiplicative haste that bypasses diminishing returns. So this just simply means that we scale better with haste than pretty much every other spec in the game. And if you remember back in the day, we used to have like haste breakpoints to get that additional tick of a heal in. That is not in the game anymore, thankfully. So you do not have to worry about that. Just for the most part, more haste is more healing. We also have our Mastery of Harmony here. This is just essentially going to increase the healing that you do to a specific target. The more hots on that target, the more healing you do to them. We do have a note down here. This is not all of your healing is increased. That's a common misconception. It's just your healing done to that one target that is increased. After that, we're going to focus on critical strike and versatility, not really prioritizing one over the other. All right, guys, that's the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you on the next one.